Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources and really try to unearth the knowledge you need to be truly well-informed. Today, we're diving deep into a figure who, for many, is almost more myth than man. Miyamoto Musashi. We're talking about, far more than just a legendary swordsman. He's become this archetype, the invincible warrior, the solitary philosopher, the master strategist. But here's the thing, right? His popular image, as well captivating as it is, often completely obscures the complex historical person underneath all that legend.
And that's exactly what we want to do today. Our mission here is to peel back those layers of legend, to try and distinguish the verifiable man from the myth that's grown up around him by looking closely at the actual historical sources, the accounts of his duels, his own writings. This deep dive, well, it aims to give you a more holistic, nuanced, maybe even surprising understanding of who he really was and why he matters.
Yeah, and as we start digging into his story, we hit this immediate challenge. There just aren't that many solid contemporary records. And what we do have is often overshadowed by later accounts, which, are frequently fictionalized, especially that incredibly popular 1935 novel by E.G. Yoshikawa, Musashi. So we'll be kind of grappling with this tension throughout between what probably happened versus why certain stories became so powerful and, frankly, persistent.
Okay, so to really get Musashi, we absolutely need to understand the world he lived in, the huge societal changes he witnessed and, well, lived through. His life basically spans this critical pivot point in Japanese history. From the chaos of the Sengoku period, that century of civil war, roughly 1467 to 1600, to the enforced stability of the Edo period, starting around 1603.
Right, and what's really fascinating here is how Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory, the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, just fundamentally reshaped everything. He imposed this really rigid feudal hierarchy. You had the emperor in the court in Kyoto, sort of symbolic rulers, but the real power, the shogun, was firmly planted in Edo, modern-day Tokyo. And below the shogun, you had the daimyo, these powerful feudal lords running their own territories. But a shogunate kept them on a tight leash with some pretty strict rules. The most clever one, I think, was the Sankin-Kutai system. It forced them to spend every other year in Edo and leave their families behind as, well, effective hostages. It was brilliant, really. Drained their money and stopped them plotting rebellion.
Which brings us to a really critical point. What happened to the samurai, the warrior class? Their main job, fighting wars, essentially vanished. So they had to transition, didn't they? They became more like bureaucrats, administrators, paid stipends by their lords, and their fighting skills, once essential for survival on the battlefield, increasingly became more of an art form. Bujutsu, they called it.
But there's a darker side to that consolidation of power too, right? It created this huge population of runin masterless samurai. Their lords were defeated, their stipends gone. So these guys were forced to wander Japan on what they called musha shugi, this warrior's pilgrimage, basically just looking for work or maybe just a new sense of purpose. And that, of course, was Musashi's path.
Exactly. And the key insight here, I think, is that this enforced peace created a kind of identity crisis for the samurai class. Their whole purpose warfare was suddenly gone. And this vacuum, this searching for meaning, led to a really important evolution from bujutsu, just martial techniques, to the martial ways. The focus shifted, less about just killing effectively, more toward spiritual discipline, self-perfection. Musashi's own journey from this, fearsome warrior of the old era to an artist and philosopher in the new one, he perfectly embodies that shift.
Okay, so let's look at Musashi's beginnings. His early life is pretty murky. Lots of conflicting sources, which kind of tells you something about the era. Born Shinmen Benosuke, probably around 1584, even the exact location is debated. His father, Shinmen Munisai, was a skilled martial artist, so he likely got his first sword lessons from him. After his mother died, he lived with his uncle, a Buddhist monk named Dorin. And that probably exposed him early on to Zen Buddhism, which you can definitely see influencing his later philosophy.
Right. And Musashi himself, in his own writings, talks about his first duel. Says he was 13, so 12 by our count, against this arrogant swordsman, Arima Kihei. Apparently, Musashi just used a wooden staff, threw the guy down, and beat him to death. Pretty brutal. Then at 16, he defeated another swordsman, Tadashima Akiyama. These early fights, they really establish his style, don't they? Incredible courage, but also this deep psychological insight and totally unconventional tactics. He wasn't just a fighter, he was playing mind games right from the start.
So what about the big battle, Sekigahara, the popular story? The one from Yoshikawa's novel, puts him on the losing side, the Toyotomi side, which, conveniently explains why he became a Ronin. But recent historical work, looking at actual clan records and stuff, suggests something different.
Yeah, that's a key point where history and legend diverge. The more reliable evidence points towards him and his father actually being with the victorious Tokugawa forces, probably fighting in a side campaign down in Kyushu. So the historical reality is likely the opposite of the popular myth.
And why do you think that losing side story stuck so hard?
Well, it really shows the power of archetypes, doesn't it? The tragic, independent run-in hero fighting against the odds. It's just a more compelling narrative, perhaps, than the pragmatic warrior who sided with the winners. Makes for a better story, I suppose.
Okay, so after Sekigahara, maybe around age 20, he shows up in Kyoto. And he does something pretty audacious. He goes after the Yoshioka clan.
Mm.
Tell us about them. Why was targeting this specific school so important for building his reputation? It wasn't just random duels, was it?
Not at all. This was highly strategic. The Yoshioka weren't just any sword school. They were the hereditary instructors to the Shurbans themselves, the absolute martial establishment in the capital. So by systematically taking them down, Musashi wasn't just proving he could win fights. He was essentially engaging in strategic branding. He was demonstrating that his radical, unconventional way could dominate even the most respected traditional methods.
Strategic branding. I like that. It's like he was building his own brand by tearing down the biggest one around. How did he actually do it? What were the tactics?
Oh, it was a masterclass in psychology and unconventional warfare. First, he challenged the head, Yoshioka Sujiro. He deliberately arrived hours late, totally unnerving the guy. Then he defeated him with a single blow from a bokken, a wooden sword crippling his arm. Imagine the humiliation.
Just a wooden sword.
No,
Wow.
exactly. Then Sujiro's brother, Denshichiro, stepped up for revenge. Musashi faced him, and again used psychology, killing him instantly with a blow to the head.
Oh.
So the clan is reeling, totally humiliated. They hatch a plan, they challenge Musashi again, but this time using the young heir, just a 12-year-old boy named Matachichiro, as bait. The real plan was an ambush with dozens of their followers.
A trap.
Right. But Musashi saw it coming. He turned the tables, arrived hours early this time, hid, and launched his own surprise attack, cutting down the young boy. Then he had to fight his way out against all the retainers, and that's reportedly where he first fought using both his long and short swords together.
Incredible. That sounds like the moment his two-sword style, Niiten Ichiri, two heavens as one, was really forged in combat. And by just dismantling Japan's top martial institution like that,
Wow.
he proved that in this new Edo era, your reputation, your name, was maybe more important than your actual battlefield record.
Absolutely. That was the currency now. And he didn't stop there. He continued his Musha Shugi, his warrior pilgrimage, defeating masters of other weapons too, like a lance master from the famous Hushinryu temple school, a guy named Shishido Baiken who used the Kusarigama, that chain and sickle weapon. And even Musho Gunasuka, the founder of a renowned staff fighting school, Shindu Mushuru. He was proving his way was universal, applicable against anything.
Now, out of all his duels, and there were supposedly over 60, none is more famous, more legendary than the one with Sasaki Kojiro. April 13, 1612, on this little island, Funajima people often call it Ganryujima now, after Koju's style. This is like the climax of his dueling career, right? The cornerstone of the Musashi myth.
Absolutely. It's the showdown, arranged by the local daimyo, Hosokawa Tadaoki, supposedly to settle the rivalry between the few most famous swordsmen of the time, and Kojiro. He was known as the demon of the western provinces. He was the perfect foil for Musashi. He was this celebrated master from a traditional school, famous for his special technique, the turning swallow cut, and his incredibly long sword, the nodachi, nicknamed the drying pole. Musashi was, unkempt, unconventional. Kojiro was polished, the establishment warrior. The contrast couldn't be more stark.
And the story of the duel itself, the popular version. It's like a perfect illustration of Musashi's strategic principles, the ones he'd later write about. You've got the psychological warfare arriving hours late again, making Kojiro furious and impatient.
Right, disrupting his mental calm, calculated move.
Then the unconventional weapon. The legend says he carved this oversized wooden sword from a spare boat oar on the way to the island, which did two things, right? It neutralized Kojiro's reach advantage from that long sword.
And it was a massive psychological insult, like saying, your fancy sword and technique mean nothing. My way is superior even with a crude piece of wood.
Exactly. And then the fight itself.
Yeah.
So decisive. Musashi gets off the boat, sees Kojiro throw away his scabbard, showing he's ready to die. And Musashi just taunts him. If you have no more use for your sheath, you are already dead. Ouch. Then he provokes the attack, avoids it, and strikes Kojiro down. One fatal blow to the head. End of story.
Well, end of the popular story. But here's where we have to ask, again, how much is fact? How much is, let's say, allegorical storytelling? The duel definitely happened. That seems historically solid. But the details, highly contested, heavily embellished over time. The earliest account we have, the Kokura Haibun from 1654, it's actually quite straightforward, much less dramatic. Later versions added all the juicy bits, the ore, the precise taunts. There are even some accounts, less flattering ones, that suggest maybe Musashi's students were hiding and ambushed Kojiro after Musashi stunned him. Heck, some historians even question if Sasaki Kojiro, as this famous rival, even existed as described, since Musashi himself doesn't mention him by name in his own major writing.
Wow, so even Kojiro's existence is debated. That really throws a wrench in the legend.
It does, but it also highlights how the duel itself becomes the sort of battleground for narratives. The lone genius victor story supports the image of Musashi the Kensei, the sword saint, embodying pure skill and strategy. The ambush version paints him as a ruthless pragmatist, victory at any cost. The real Musashi was probably somewhere in between, but the ambiguity lets the story serve different cultural needs over time. It shows how we shape heroes to fit the lessons we want them to teach.
Okay, so after Ganrajijima, that big dramatic duel, Musashi's life seems to shift gears. The wandering duelist phase, the Musha Shugish, it kind of winds down. He enters this more mature stage. We see him involved in military service, but maybe more as a strategist. He finds patronage, stability, and then this deep dive into art and philosophy. It's not really retirement, is it? More like the final expression of his way.
That's a great way to put it. It wasn't just about one-on-one duels anymore. He had real large-scale conflict experience, too. He served with the Tokugawa forces, the winning side, remember, during the Siege of Osaka in 1614-15, which again sort of pushes back against that romantic, anti-establishment Ronin image. And then much later, when he was 53, he was actually a strategic advisor to the Ogasawara clan during the Shimabara Rebellion in 1637. And this was a huge peasant uprising, though there's a funny little story from that campaign. Apparently, he got knocked off his horse by a rock thrown by one of the rebels, a reminder that even legends aren't immune to mundane accidents.
Huh. That's fantastic. Brings him down to earth a bit. So, in these later years, he finally settles down, accepts the stability he seemed to avoid earlier.
It seems so. He spent time as a guest and retainer for several powerful daimyo. His final position was in service to the Hosokawa clan, the lords of Kumamoto Castle, starting in 1640, and this patronage, the security, it gave him the time and space to really dedicate himself to teaching his Knight in Ichiri school, to writing, and importantly, to pursuing the fine arts.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. His art wasn't just a hobby, was it? It was deeply connected to his martial philosophy.
Absolutely connected. It was like the ultimate proof of his central claim that the principles of strategy heihu are universal. They apply everywhere. He became a really renowned master of subokuga, that's monochrome ink painting, and also calligraphy. And he applied the exact same focus, the same discipline, the same insight to the brush as he did to the sword.
You can see it in his style, right? People describe it as powerful, direct, that remarkable economy of strokes. It sounds just like his fighting philosophy, do nothing which is of no use.
Precisely. In ink painting, especially subokuga, every single brush stroke is final. You can't erase it, you can't correct it. It demands the same decisiveness, the same commitment as a sword cut. And his use of negative space, the Japanese call it, that empty space on the paper, it's strategically vital. It perfectly parallels the concept of the void in his philosophy. It's about what isn't there being as important as what is.
Do we have examples of his work?
We do. Some famous paintings survive. Shrike on a dead tree, Kabuku Maikakuzu is a great example. The shrike, it's a small bird but a fierce predator, and he paints it with this incredible coiled tension. It's like a visual metaphor for readiness, for timing key ideas from his fire scroll. There's also Wild Geese Among Reeds, a famous self-portrait, and he even made practical art, like designing sword guards, tsuba. For Musashi, art wasn't some separate thing he did on the side. It was fully integrated. It was another way, a nonviolent way, to keep exploring and expressing his way.
Okay, so this leads us to his written legacy. In his very last years, living as a hermit in the Reigandu cave near Kumamoto, he puts it all down on paper. Go Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings. Finished in 1645, just before he died. Dedicated to his top student. And this isn't just a sword fighting manual, is it? It's much bigger than that. It's like a treatise on the universal way of strategy.
Exactly. It's profound. He structures it around the 5 elements from Buddhist cosmology: earth, water, fire, wind, and void. It maps out this journey, really, from basic knowledge all the way to intuitive mastery. So, the Earth Scroll, that's the foundation. He compares the way of strategy to being a master carpenter. You gotta know your tools, work with discipline. It's all about mastering fundamentals, getting rid of useless flourishes. And he lays out 9 core precepts here, like Do not think dishonestly, become acquainted with every art, and that famous one, do nothing which is of no use. This is the solid ground.
Okay, earth is the foundation. What about water?
The water scroll uses water as the metaphor, obviously.
Yeah.
It's all about flexibility, fluidity, adaptability. Like water taking the shape of its container, your spirit and tactics have to adapt to the opponent, the situation. This part has the most technical detail about his two-sword style, Niiten Ichiru's, but he always stresses the internal state over just the physical moves. Keep the mind calm, balanced, ready to shift.
Then fire. Sounds intense.
The fire scroll deals with the heat of the battle itself, the dynamics of the fight, the energy of conflict. This is the most tactical section, really. It talks about timing, rhythm, how to seize the initiative. He gets into battle psychology, how to disrupt your enemy's rhythm, create confusion, and how to press relentlessly once you have an edge. He calls it pressing down the pillow. Don't let them recover.
And wind. What's the wind scroll about?
The Wind Scroll is fascinating. It's basically a critical analysis of other martial arts schools of his day. He dissects their techniques, their philosophies, not just to be arrogant, but to illustrate a key strategic idea. You must know your competition, understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their habits. Only then can you see the real advantages of your own path and figure out how to beat them. It's about intellectual rigor, competitive analysis.
Which leaves the void scroll. Sounds very philosophical.
It is. The Void Scroll is the final, deepest part. It represents the ultimate state of mastery, where technique, thought, conscious effort, they all dissolve into intuitive, spontaneous action. It's heavily influenced by Zen concepts of emptiness, shunyata, or no mind, mushin. You reach a state beyond rigid rules, beyond fear, beyond doubt. The master in the void acts naturally, effortlessly. Actions just arise from deep practice and awareness. As Musashi puts it, by knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist. It's about understanding the emptiness from which all things arise.
It's amazing how relevant this feels even today. Business strategy, military tactics.
Yeah.
People still study this book. Why do you think it has that kind of lasting power?
Because fundamentally, it's not just about swords, it's an epistemological text, right? It's a manual on how to achieve mastery in almost anything, that 5-scroll structure. It maps a universal learning process. Earth, learn the basics. Water and fire, apply them, adapt them. Wind, benchmark yourself, learn from others. Void, internalize it all until it's second nature, unconscious competence. It's a timeless model for skill acquisition.
But that wasn't his only final writing, was it? Just a week before he died in 1645, while giving away his stuff, preparing for the end, he wrote something else, very different. Dugdu, The Way of Walking Alone. Just a short, stark list, 21 precepts.
Yeah, the Dokudu is intense. It's his final distillation, unadorned, deeply ascetic, a code for living, stripped down to the absolute essentials. The precepts themselves, they're pretty radical in their demand for detachment and self-mastery. You can kind of group them into themes.
Like what?
Well, first, there's acceptance and non-attachment. It starts right off with, accept everything just the way it is. Powerful stuff. Then it hammers on detaching from external comforts. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Be detached from desire your whole life long. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Be indifferent to where you live. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. It's about finding freedom within.
Very austere. What else?
Then there's radical self-reliance. Absolutely unwavering reliance on your own judgment, your own strength. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. Act with full conviction or not at all. And maybe the most striking one. Respect Buddha and the gods without counting on their help. That's declaring total spiritual independence. Responsibility rests entirely with you.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Third, you could call it emotional austerity, living beyond the sway of typical human emotions. Never let yourself be saddened by a separation. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others, aiming for this profound inner calm.
And family.
Finally, it all comes down to the primacy of honor and the way. 2 absolute commands seal it. You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor, and never stray from the way. For Musashi, honor wasn't about social standing. It was this internal code, unwavering commitment. And the way was the ultimate path, the lifelong pursuit that integrates everything.
It's such a unique philosophy. You can see bits of Zen, bits of Bushido, but it's really his own thing, forged from his life. That focus on accepting what you can't control, but mastering your inner self. People often compare it to Western Stoicism.
There are definite parallels, yeah. And if you connect it back to the context, the Daikuju can almost be seen as Musashi creating a new kind of Bushido. One for the individual, the Runin, in an age where feudal loyalty wasn't the only anchor anymore. Traditional Bushido. Huge emphasis on loyalty to your lord, the Dokuge. Doesn't mention a lord once. It's all about personal honor, the internal way. He basically recenters the whole warrior code onto the self, making it portable, internal, a philosophy of integrity you carry within you. It's like the practical ethical code for someone who's truly grasped the void from the Five Rings.
So, fast forward to today. Centuries later, Musashi's shadow is long. His influence is still felt, right? Across cultures, disciplines.
Oh, absolutely. His actual sword school, Hishiniten Ichiru, it's still practice. They preserve his two-sword techniques. And his strategic thinking is still foundational in modern Japanese martial arts like kendo.
But it goes way beyond the dojo, doesn't it? The Book of Five Rings had this massive resurgence in the 20th century, especially in the business world.
Yeah, that was a huge phenomenon starting in the 70s and 80s. Western executives particularly started studying it, looking for secrets to Japanese management success, competitive strategy.
Right. They turned his principles into business metaphors. Earth scroll for core competencies, water for being adaptable, fire for decisive action in the market, wind for checking out the competition. It's become this, standard text for business leaders, military strategists, even just people into self-help.
And then there's the pop culture impact. His life story, that mix of fact and legend, it's just irresistible. Yoshikawa's novel basically set the template for decades of films, TV shows. More recently, you had the manga Vagabond, amazing art, deep psychological take on his journey, and his name, his rivalry with Kojiro,
Yeah.
it pops up everywhere. Pokemon, you mentioned Jesse and James, are Musashi and Kojiro in Japanese. Video games like Samurai Showdown, Dark Souls Echoes, he's become the global image of the samurai ideal.
Which leads to this really interesting paradox about his legacy today, doesn't it? He's this symbol of traditional Japan, but also this global icon whose ideas are seen as totally universal. It seems possible because the strategic stuff in the Five Rings is abstract enough. You can take it away from swords and apply it to any fight, boardroom, personal life, whatever. So we celebrate this instrumental Musashi, the strategist, the winner. His ideas become a toolkit for success, especially in competitive capitalist systems.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial question, what happened to the Dokuge? Where's the ascetic Musashi in all this? The guy who preached radical detachment from wealth, pleasure, possessions, ambition. That philosophy is fundamentally anti-materialistic. It runs completely counter to the goals his strategies are often used for today. So Musashi's modern legacy has been kind of split in two, bifurcated. The world grabbed the useful, market-friendly strategist and quietly ignored the radical, challenging philosopher who wrote The Way of Walking Alone.
So we've journeyed through the life, the work, the legacy of Miyamoto Musashi. We've tried to look past the legend, examine the complex historical figure in his time. We've seen him go from this feared duelist in a warring nation to, a reclusive master trying to define a universal way in an age of peace.
Yeah, the picture that comes through is full of contradictions, isn't it? A killer who becomes this sublime artist, a fierce individualist who ends up accepting patronage, a pragmatist who becomes a deep philosopher, a uniquely Japanese figure who somehow becomes a global icon. And his art wasn't him abandoning the sword, it was continuing its principles in another form, proving his core idea. Master one way, and you understand the way in everything.
And his writings, the Book of Five Rings and the Dokyu, they really capture that whole arc, from how to win to how to live with integrity and self-reliance.
Ultimately, I think his lasting importance isn't just the undefeated record, it's that relentless, lifelong search for mastery itself. He embodies that huge shift in what it meant to be samurai, from being defined by war to being defined by a search for purpose.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? Maybe consider this. We live in a world that pushes us constantly accumulate more, get external validation, chase endless desires. What might it look like to actually take Musashi's Dokuden, his way of walking alone, seriously? To try and cultivate that internal code of honor, that self-reliance that doesn't depend on what's happening outside, even if it clashes with how his strategies are usually used today? Just something to think about until our next deep dive.